Thank you all for being here. We're very excited to continue this conversation. A lot of great conversations today, along similar lines, about how do we prepare kids better for their future and make sure that they are on track for career, long-term economic success. So one of the topics that we are talking about here today is this idea of traditional college not being the only path to success. And how do we begin to change that conversation and really drive dialogue in that way? So we've got some great experts on this issue that we will hear from today. So we've got Dr. Aisha Francis, who is the president of Benjamin Franklin Cummings Institute of Technology. Alex Wurzel, deputy director of acceleration at JFF Labs. Ed Lambert, executive director of the Mass Business Alliance for Education. And Payman Rahannaford, co-founder and CEO of Propel America. So before we jump into questions, maybe if I can ask each of you to give sort of the 2-minute high level on your organization, so we can sort of level set what it is you do and the point of view you bring to this conversation. Maybe Alex, I'll start with you.
Sure. Thanks so much, Julie. Let's make sure this is on first. Hi, is that working? Terrific. Thanks again, Julie. I'm Alex Wurzel. I'm with Jobs for the Future, based here in Boston. We are a nonprofit focused on transformation of the education and workforce systems. We've been around for 40 years, and just about 4 or 5 years ago launched JFF Labs, which was intended to be the bridge to the private sector, the innovation layer, the startup community, and others who we believe need to be at the table to drive the kind of systems change that I think probably everyone in this room is thinking about. So my work specifically focuses on insights and innovation in these spaces. What does it look like to bring new technologies, new models into broader awareness across this field and help put them into practice so that they can reach the populations that we're all focused on serving. Great to be here.
Thanks. Dr. Francis.
Good afternoon. I am Aisha Francis. I'm the president and CEO of Benjamin Franklin Cummings Institute of Technology. We are a technical and trade college, 2-year college here in Boston, and our focus is to increase accessible, affordable access to education that is college credit bearing, but also serves the middle skills needs of our region, the greater Boston region. We date our existence back to Benjamin Franklin himself, who left part of his estate to the city of Boston to make sure that folks had access to trade and apprenticeships, and so we retain fidelity to that and the fact that we still train today in trades, but also have added technology, engineering, and IT, and I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Dr. Francis. My name is Ed Lambert. I'm the executive director of the Massachusetts Business Alliance for Education. We don't go quite as far back as Ben Franklin, but 30 plus years ago, a business leader in Massachusetts named Jack Rennie and Paul Revel co-founded this organization. We represent currently about 31,000 employers across the state, 38 affiliate organizations, corporate members, very much committed still to ensuring high quality education and access to all students. Oh, is it off? It's off. You've probably heard that anyway, right?
Yeah. I mean, I can hear it from the back.
Oh, excellent. Looking for ensuring high quality educational opportunities for students. Of course, concerned about the talent pipeline, but also very concerned about equity and ensuring that there's a place in the Commonwealth for all of our students. So, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Hey everyone, Payman Rahannaford. I'm with Propel America, and at Propel, we're a relatively young organization, and what we do is help 18 to 24-year-olds get a good job in healthcare that leads to career mobility, and we do it through a model we call Jobs First Higher Education. What that means is in 6 months or less, our graduates earn a living wage job via an industry-recognized credential that comes with a meaningful amount of college credits, as you heard Aisha describe in her model. And we do this on a national level through a blended delivery model. It's mostly virtual. My background is in K-12 education, so I spent the prior 10 years working in school districts. I was a superintendent of a district in southern New Jersey, and that has, like many of our colleagues at Propel, very much shaped the way we think about this work, where we, in Camden and other districts I was a part of, dramatically changed the college culture of those schools, the college going rates, only to see a commensurate increase in stop-outs of young people entering the labor market with debt and little additional earning ability. And what we're aiming to do is create a third way, so young people aren't forced to choose between forestalling income and accruing debt in pursuit of traditional higher ed, or forestalling educational mobility to go work in an entry-level job. And so that's work we do, and really nice to be here.
Great, thanks so much. So I realized I didn't introduce myself. So I'm Julie Lambert, Senior Vice President of Advocacy and Corporate Social Responsibility for American Student Assistance. And we're a national nonprofit that's focused on helping young people as early as middle school really begin to plan more thoughtfully, understand their own interests and aptitudes and how that aligns with long-term career education and career goals. So just to level set this conversation a little bit. So this idea of expanding education to career opportunities is really not novel. It's not nothing that is radical. It's really catching up to meet the needs of new generation, modern workforce, changing economy. And in fact, many might argue, and I think you mentioned this perfectly, that a lot of today's challenges really stem from this idea that there's only one path for everybody, and that 4 years is the only option when looking for long-term education success. And so while that might have worked for some, it has certainly not worked ideally for all, and we really need to figure out different ways to think about this. So ASA recently launched work with JFF to try to shift thinking around how we as a society sort of think about that trajectory from high school into post-secondary education, what that can and should mean, how do we value that, how do employers value that, how do students value that, how do parents value that. And one of the things that we started with was a set of surveys of both Gen Z and the employer sector to understand what their current perceptions of some of these pathways were. And what we really found was their reluctance to participate in new pathways really goes back to a sense of risk. I don't understand what I'm getting. I don't understand how to value these credentials. And from students, it's too much of a risk to take this step that I don't necessarily see others doing, or that there's not a well-trod path there. I see employers are still defaulting to four-year degree. So how do we begin to shift some of these issues? Alex, let's start with you. So one of the pieces of work we're doing this work with JFS is a landscape study of what all of these different pathways look like, all of these credential types. So what does the research tell us about the evolving landscape and promising new models in this space?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. I mean, I think the headline of what we're seeing is just how dynamic this space is. And in many ways, a lot of the tried and true models that are out there have existed for a very long time. Models like apprenticeship, that are inherently a bit of a hybrid, right? Combinations of classroom-based learning, work-based learning, and others. And I think what we're starting to see is more and more pathways and organizations that are doing work like Propel, for instance, combining different elements of what we can think of as being traditional sort of foundational building blocks or approaches to pedagogy, approaches to learning that can then create an opportunity for learners to choose their own pathway and to choose when the information is present, and that's key, a combination of these elements that's going to work well for them. So whether that's a very, very short-term credential, but that also includes some project-based learning, or that includes an internship or an externship to give them some exposure to the work environment, whether it is an apprenticeship, but maybe in a space beyond where we would think of apprenticeships as naturally falling, like the skilled trades, or now increasingly like technology. We're starting to see that model creep into other spaces. And even models that are taking the best of college, whether it's credit or other sort of experiential elements of college, and bringing that into some of these other models. So offering college credit as a currency, to give people the opportunity to earn and have college credit that they can bank towards a future degree while still getting an in-demand credential. And so it's a very, very dynamic space. We're seeing a lot of innovation and activity happening in a way that is incredibly exciting for learners, and I think also creates a lot of opportunities to help address some of the issues that you named that we're seeing in the research, where we need to be able to create an environment of transparency, of trust, of giving learners, their families, and employers more information about what's going on in each of these programs to help them make the right decision, not just based on some of these surface questions about program design, but about, at the end of the day, outcomes and quality.
Yeah, and that's a really tricky piece to navigate, right? Because people inherently, whether it's a reality or not, think they understand the value of a bachelor's degree. Like they've heard about it for a long time. I'm going to default to that because that's what I know. But you are an organization that has now spent months sort of going through all of these different credentials, and with a team of people. Families can't possibly do that. So what types of tools do you think we need or are available to help kids navigate all of these options?
Yeah, I think a myriad of them is the short answer, some of which the providers and programs themselves need to do, and we're seeing innovators take steps in that direction, and some that we need academic institutions and other systems to be able to do. So we need programs to be as transparent as they can be about the data and the outcomes that they're generating. And again, we're seeing this start to happen. At the same time, data is hard, right? When meaningful data on outcomes is meant to answer questions like, not only did you get a job, but what are you earning, and did you persist in that job for 90 days or 6 months or a year? You're stitching together a lot of different systems that aren't built to talk to one another, right? So that's a really critical issue that we see. On the front end, at the same time, and I know this is something that ASA cares a lot about, we need to give learners a lot more resources and information about how to navigate these pathways and how to decide where their interests lie. And also to recognize the fact that your interest and your sort of approach to your future career when you are 14, 15, 16 is going to evolve over the course of your life. And so being able to normalize that idea that you're taking a first step, you're laying a strong foundation, and there will be steps throughout the course of your career. Right now, there's no real GPS for people to be able to navigate those career decisions over the course of their lives. We assume that it's one and done. And so I think we need much more holistic support for learners and their families and employers who are trying to navigate this from the other side, right? To recognize both what's going to be a good fit for me, and then how do I validate that this particular choice of pathway is going to meet the needs that I've come with.
That's great. Dr. Francis, let's turn to you. So, your institution, as you say, has been around for a very long time. How do you articulate that value, the add value of your institution to both students looking to attend and the employers looking to hire your graduates? Because that seems to be a huge sticking point for a lot of new programs that are trying to sort of meet the model that you've created.
Yes, well, I think there are two ways. One is through our outcomes. We have consistently had more than 50% graduation rate, which for two-year colleges is far above a national average, and folks in this region know that. And then our earnings, the earnings that graduates are earning when they graduate, and 83% full-time in-field job placement rate, 95% job placement rate overall. And most of our students are very low income, so they're coming from household incomes of in the 20s, $20,000, and then they're individually going on to earn in the high 40s in less than 6 months with a year or two of college under their belt. So the outcomes are one of the things that attracts the students who are interested in what we do. And then the other piece is that 60% of our students are first-generation college students. And Julie, you mentioned the fact that we've been preaching college attainment for a very long time, and people do hold that as a value. And even folks who want technical education are intrigued by the idea that you can become an electrician, become an HVAC technician, and have that be a college credential. And so that's that blend of the two, that they don't have to choose one or the other, is a particularly attractive prospect. And I think it's important that more people understand that college is a pathway to the trades. And there's apprenticeship, there's the unions, and there's college, technical college.
I know you said you were beginning to build new pathways. How do you work with employers to make sure that the programs that you're building will meet the needs of a constantly changing workforce and sort of job environment for your students?
Yeah, we do that through industry advisory boards, and each major we have has an advisory group of at least 5, and in some cases up to 10 people who are from the industry doing exactly what it is that some of the types of jobs that we are training our students to perform. And they're vetting our curriculum twice a year with the faculty and the professors that are teaching in those areas, helping to make these decisions. For instance, in advanced manufacturing, should we train in SolidWorks or, should we train in Autodesk or PTC? You know, how do we make those decisions? And we make them with industry who are hiring our students. So that's the choice that we make, and you know, there are multiple things that you can introduce in a classroom, but ultimately, you know, we only have a few semesters. And so we're really looking to our industry advisory board members to guide us. And then again, also pay close attention to the job placement outcomes and the earnings to really have another data point.
Yeah, and that data point, that data piece is so crucial, and I think really a missing piece in the puzzle for a lot of the program, and helping both employers and students understand that it is not really a risk that they would be taking one of these paths. Payman, talk a little bit about Propel. How do you recruit students to your program and really articulate the value of the education and training that they're going to get? Because it is a different model. It's very different than Dr. Francis's.
Yeah, so we recruit 18 to 24-year-olds, and we have high school partnerships that we, in terms of working with guidance counselors and classroom teachers to get the word out about our program. And I go back to when I was working inside of school systems, and in Camden, there's a four-year college pennant hanging in every classroom and hallway now, and that wasn't the case prior to our administration, and that's now a headwind, right, that we have to deal with. And the way we talk about it, and it was really interesting hearing Dr. Francis describe the way she articulates their model. We learned a lot of lessons early on when we went inside of high schools and we said, look, if you join Propel, you're gonna make this living wage amount, you're gonna have no debt, we're actually gonna pay you a stipend, you're gonna have a one-on-one coach. It was met with a lot of skepticism, from parents especially. And by the way, we found—
What are you selling me?
Right, exactly. I mean, it sounds too good to be true, but here's the kicker. It didn't mention anything about college.
Right.
And then when we made it clear that actually you're leaving with about 12 credits worth of college that you can stack into a higher degree through our partner higher ed institution called National Louis University, which is a nonprofit in Chicago. And that all of a sudden the tenor of the conversation changed. And so, you know, it was interesting. We were in a conversation earlier today. Michael Warren told us, like, prior to 1960s, 70s, you didn't need a bachelor's degree to get to a meaningful, you know, a job in terms of wages, you know, a middle-class job. And here we are now talking about how can we sort of push the gears a little bit in the other direction. And I think the reality of families, particularly families in historically marginalized communities, and this is very clear in the Gallup data, like, college is still sort of the end destination of what the American dream is, and for you know, my humble opinion, the innovations that we're discussing have to, in some shape or form, pull in traditional higher ed as part of those innovations.
Right, absolutely. And you work specifically with the healthcare sector through Propel. So how do you work with healthcare providers to make sure that the students you're training are sort of meeting their needs in the same way that Dr. Francis does?
Yeah, so our role in the model, the Jobs First Higher Education model, is to integrate with employers. We've chosen healthcare not because we think it's better than any other sector, but really just to minimize complexity and to kind of allow us to be able to focus on one sector and to be candid with you. Well, we have a lot of peer organizations that are in IT space and some other spaces that, you know, we thought healthcare was sort of untouched in a way. Yeah, and like there's a reason a lot of folks aren't trying to tackle healthcare. It's very regulated and a lot of red tape, and we come from K-12 systems, so we're sort of used to that. And so we partner with traditional hospital systems, you know, healthcare delivery systems, and we're also in the applied behavioral analysis space, where we recruit registered behavioral technicians who work with students with autism and spectrum disorder. And we try to understand what are the durable skills, if you will, that they need to be successful, and then we complement that with the technical skills that they get through our training program.
Okay, great. So Ed, let's turn to you. So, you know, the research that ASA and JFF has done shows that there is really an openness from employers to start thinking differently about how they're recruiting and hiring, but they still tend to default to a bachelor's degree, even though the research that we've seen says they do not believe bachelor's degree is necessarily a good signal of skills. But it's what they know. And so what do you think employers need to feel more confident in these new ways of educating and training people for the job market?
Well, Julie, I think that's right, but we see the transition. We're having more and more of those conversations with industry-wide associations that are affiliates of ours and the like. And I want to commend you, the organizers, for this panel, because it's about innovation, and to think about the work that JFF's doing, what's happening in Ben Franklin, and the great work here at Propel. And by the way, you can hear me all excited when you use the term durable skills, because we strongly believe as an organization that these are not soft skills, that they are lifelong, durable skills that students need to have a good grounding in. So we see that transition happening, and I think that what it's going to take is continued communication and conversation, data gathering, which is incredibly important because it helps move the needle with CEOs and HR departments. But they have to be high-quality programs. They have to be high-quality programs, and we have to kind of target down into the credentials and consider credentialing, industry-recognized credentials, durable skills credentials, those kinds of things that offer some certainty and some greater certification than just a broad-based degree, whether it be a high school degree, an associate's, or even a bachelor's. The fact of the matter is that high school's gotten away from us a little bit. And if you go back 30 years, I was mentioning when MBAE was formed, it was in the aftermath of a nation at risk, et cetera, et cetera. There was a great focus on the quality of K through 12 education. And as time has moved on, we've considered more about, well, what's happening at the higher ed level and the like. But the fact is that we can't have a deep talent pipeline or a diverse talent pipeline unless we start earlier in high school and do so in what I heard the prior panel talking about, relative to some of this blurring and innovation that makes a ton of sense. But I think it's quality, credentialing, continued involvement. The last thing I would mention is, you know, that our organization is very engaged with attempting to promote the PTEC model, and I know that BFIT and others have been looking at that as well. If you think about the very first...
Sorry, does everyone know what PTEC is?
So PTEC stands for, oh my gosh. Technical Early College High School, right? Thank you. Pathway, Technical Early College High School. Yeah, there you go. And Stan Litow, who literally just wrote the book on the first PTEC that got formed in Brooklyn. Brooklyn talked about the experience with the New York school superintendent and the CEO of IBM, who went to, Flushing Meadows to the U.S. Open, the conversation about how he could partner, and the IBM CEO went back to his HR department and said, what are we going to do to determine that we can hire a workforce with less than a bachelor's degree? And it was based on that model that the PTEC context conversation took place. So it can happen, but it just involves, I think, a ton of this communication and the kinds of things that you're hearing people here talk about.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that we see is that in order to make a huge shift, this is both a cultural shift and an operational shift for HR departments who are already risk averse. So what are you seeing from business trying to shift internally to make some of this beyond the IBMs of the world that are sort of always held up to be, at the forefront of doing this? Most organizations are much smaller, much harder to shift. What are you seeing from the business side?
Well, there's some challenges in the larger corporations and industries, but we're having some pretty in-depth conversations with life sciences and healthcare and others where the HR folks are really looking to be very creative in this and making some investments and getting folks more involved in curriculum and the development of pathways. So it is happening, but like any culture shift, it's just going to continue to take some time and some work. Yeah.
So Payman and Dr. Francis, you both mentioned this, but I'd like to go back to an issue of, the idea of encouraging students to take a path other than college. Certainly, there is some resistance, at which we are trying to minimize with better understanding, but there is also an argument to be made that there is too much risk of establishing tracking systems and that it will harm generations, that have harmed generations of students. How do we prioritize equity in this work, and how are you looking at that issue of that it can't be an either or, right? We have to talk about both. So maybe Payman, I'll start with you about the issue of how we prioritize equity and thinking about pathways.
Yeah, I think about this question all the time, and going back to my district work, I remember there was this moment when we considered expanding this one program in the city of Camden where we were, that is essentially like a microcosm of what we're doing now at Propel, and To a person, everyone on our leadership team pushed back on it because of philosophical tension, because of values tension, and if we don't want this for our own children, why would we want to bring this to the city of Camden? I sort of grappled with that for a really long time. Where I've landed is, I believe it's ultimately about on-ramps and off-ramps to a choice-filled life. And when you think about applying the order of life operations that made sense for, I'll speak for myself and our family, and higher ed essentially being a forcing mechanism to forestall income, and so the opportunity cost being what it is, and just applying that to sort of all people and saying, well, that's equity. Then you look at the unintended consequences of those who come from families and communities where they need to find a quicker pathway to stability, which is something we learned, by the way, as educators, and Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like security and safety is most important. And so we're sort of putting them in a treacherous position if that's the only option. And so that's why our model is about, well, if you need a quicker pathway to economic stability, let's not foreclose future higher educational attainment either.
And do you want to?
Yeah, I guess I would completely agree. But you know, tracking is only a bad thing if it's trapping, right? So Paymon talked about these on-ramps and off-ramps, building in flexibility into the system that helps make things happen. I keep going back to P-TECH, but in the P-TECH model, they purposely recruited students who at the 8th grade level were performing under grade level, and those students had their learning accelerated in such a way that many of them went beyond the free associate's degree that they got in the program to go on to further college. So we think if you could do that, if you think about the fact that a lot of our high schools are basically built on a tracking model now. The problem is that too many kids don't have access, and this is an equity issue, too many kids don't have access to a meaningful pathway. So they're on this general track, right, which is really a path to nowhere. By creating some meaningful pathways, giving people or kids flexibility to move back and forth, I think JFF has talked about a lot of that kind of work, and talking about informing students and parents and arming them with information and giving them some authority and autonomy to have a personalized learning plan. That kind of creation of multiple pathways certainly makes sense. But it's a very significant equity issue when you consider the fact that we have too many kids currently who just don't have enough access to a meaningful pathway.
Dr. Francis?
So the way I enter into this thinking, to add on to what's been shared, is thinking about what drives so much of the angst. And I think it is the way in which we've set up the hierarchy of what's more valuable work, and even the persistent ways that some people continue to talk about essential work as low-skilled work when it's not. And so, if you know and understand that technical education is very difficult work to do, and that it does pay well, then I think that's information that we can share with parents or influencers in the guidance community who are wary of encouraging students who themselves are sometimes very interested in what we're offering and are being dissuaded. Mm-hmm. And they're being dissuaded because of, to go back to where I started, because they're afraid that their loved one or the youth that they are counseling won't earn as much as they could, that they will be in a dirty job, that they will be in a low-skilled career. And so it's really, I think, some of this hesitancy is fueled by a lack of information about what we mean by the types of fields, and what is advanced manufacturing. And a huge barrier is that not enough of us honestly know. We don't see the work that happens, and so we assume that it is work that is somehow devalued, demeaning, and that it would disadvantage people who choose to go into these fields. And the truth is that we often say internally, we're a place where you start here and you go anywhere. And it's not, even though we are offering associate degrees, and we do have some 2+2 degrees, who among us is doing the same thing now that we were doing at age 21 or 22, or even thought we were going to be doing? And so we put so much pressure on this early career choice, and I understand why, but I also think that we need to take a step back and realize that most people have long careers, and that the important piece is to start with a quality post-secondary option. Hopefully, I think hopefully that is also college. Then perhaps we can, decouple these choices from so much angst about whether or not we're disadvantaging students.
That's great. Alex, did you?
It's hard to follow those extraordinary comments, and I agree with all of them. I think this idea of not valorizing certain occupations over others, and not perpetuating systems that have led to occupational segregation, that have led to tracking of the kind that we've been describing, is so critical. So at the end of the day, as we think about what constitutes a quality job, we were talking about this earlier, all jobs should be quality jobs. All jobs need to be. And there is no such thing as a low-skilled person or a low-skilled job. There are extraordinary skills in every job. And so it becomes about both making sure that the job that's ready to receive someone is of a quality that befits the human being that's going to enter into it, right? And that you're finding the right match between the person and the opportunity. And it's something that is well aligned with someone's interests, with the skills that they've developed, and with the opportunities that they're hoping to seek, at least in that next step of their career, knowing that they're going to go on probably to have several more.
So Ellen, I'm going to come to you next. I'm going to go down the other way. I'm looking at this. What do you think we could be doing more at the K-12 level to encourage new ways of thinking about post-secondary education?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we've heard it a bit here on the panel so far, is the idea of just exposure and awareness to different career paths. I remember when I was in college and my mom came to a panel at Parents Weekend at which a number of alumni spoke, and she caught up with me afterwards and said all of those people said that the job that they held at that moment didn't exist when they were in college, which blew her mind. But this recognition of this idea that they're, notwithstanding what you might see in a childhood picture book, the job opportunities that exist in the world are beyond being a policeman or a firefighter or a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. There are tremendous opportunities in careers. And so the more we can bring a greater degree of career exposure along with an understanding of what it looks like to enter into those career paths, and that those pathways are open to everybody, is going to be really essential, which also means making sure that young people see people who are from their backgrounds, who bring their identities in those spaces, which as we know is critical, and that we're equipping not just career counselors and others who are offering guidance, but teachers, administrators, and others with the information that they need to say, here's what it looks like to enter into this career path. You can pursue an apprenticeship, you can pursue a 2-year degree, you can pursue an option like Propel. There are so many options that are available to you. Here's what the next steps look like. Here are the outcomes that you can expect out of those pathways, to get back to the data question. And how do you evaluate and make the choice about which one of those is going to be a good fit for you? I mean, first of all, that's a lot to put on anyone. These are complicated decisions. But the more we can empower people to be able to ask the right questions, and I think we think about labor market data a good bit at JFF, and some of these tools, even again, to ask the right questions about what jobs are in demand in my area, in my region, what is growing in the next couple of years. The more we can both empower people to ask those questions, to know that they're the right questions to ask, and to give them the information that they and their learners need to be able to answer those questions for themselves, just puts you in a different position to be able to plan very proactively for the next 3 to 5 years, and to put the steps in place that you need to do to be able to pursue that pathway and to do it effectively.
That's great. Dr. Francis?
So we do have at Benjamin Franklin Institute an early college program, but by and large, we're really focused on our part of the continuum. And where I am concerned, and my colleagues are concerned, is several things that Ed mentioned is about the quality of education. at the middle school and high school levels, which then, impacts people's ability to be successful in whatever post-secondary option they choose. So, we need more middle school algebra. We need more access to computer science in high schools. We need exposure to more technical education and training, particularly in the core of cities. We see a lot of that access going and being strong in suburbs. So, I think there's a lot of disparities and inequities within the high school system that we are playing catch up. Leaves us with a lot of work that goes into developmental education for students who just did not have access to the level of math and science in particular, because we're a STEM school, that allows them to pursue the things they want to pursue. To enter our electrical engineering program, you have to have had calculus, and they just can't get to it because they, didn't start early enough with the math that they needed in high school. And those kinds of things, I think, are system changes that are hard for individuals and their families to push against. When you think about the constitution of most public school systems and who's there, very high percentages of students who are English language learners, whose families are working a ton and are immigrants, and it's just hard to have the bandwidth to do the kinds of things that we know we need to do. And so my hope is that some of the obstacles that are systemic can be taken away by a different emphasis and focus at high schools and more equity in the high school system.
Great, that's great, absolutely. Ed, do you want to add to that? I know about equity in high school, and high school preparedness is a huge issue for you, but anything else to add?
Well, yeah, those were all terrific comments. It feels like Massachusetts, though, is primed for a bold vision about redesigning high school and focusing on college and career, and ensuring that every student has access to a meaningful pathway, and that those pathways, as they've been defined here, that they are flexible, that they have high standards for all students, and that's incredibly important. That goes to what Dr. Francis was just talking about here as well. And Brown University research shows a direct correlation between MCAS achievement or academic achievement and college and career success down the line. So we need to do that, but we know that that's not the only thing, right? And that there's no reason why every pathway, no matter where a student might think they're bound, shouldn't have some college credit, shouldn't have some credentialing, shouldn't have some technical education. I mean, Mass Inc. is doing some research now that shows that the most effective early college programs are the ones that are sequenced, career themed, and have some technical aspect to them. So that should be for everybody, right? And access to everybody. And alignment, and you mentioned alignment as well, making sure, particularly the business community, is very focused on trying to ensure that our programs are aligned to the labor market needs, so that we can honestly say to students and parents, we're going to set you on this pathway because we expect that there will be some opportunities for you to have a family-sustaining wage. So growing early college, innovation pathways, Voc Tech, making sure we have equitable access to vocational technical career education in Massachusetts is incredibly important. Computer science, we have 27% of our high school students who've done high school without a single computer science course yet. How important is that today? So I'm sorry you asked me a question that I think I will talk about for quite some time.
That's okay.
But
That's why you're here.
But it's a great idea, and it all makes sense.
That's great. Payman, anything to add to that? No? You're good. Okay, so we're almost at time, but I just want to ask one more question. So if maybe one quick answer from each of you. So if we need to prioritize, what one thing do we need to prioritize in order to take big steps in changing both perception and acceptance of diversity in post-secondary education methods? Is there one innovation? Is there one metric we need? Or is there one thing we need from the business community? What do you think it is that we need to prioritize?
I would say, and obviously this is shaped from my unique perspective and the work that I'm doing and the fact that we can't meet the demand of our employers and match supply to it, it's a public campaign to valorize non-traditional post-secondary pathways.
And
I agree. I think it's state leadership is part of that vision, bringing everybody to the table to talk about why that would be important.
I concur, but to say something different, I would say skills-based hiring and more of a groundswell for companies around what that looks like and how to do that.
Everyone is stealing my answer. I was
Tough to
gonna-
go last.
I was going to say all of that, and specifically, we need to support employers on how to do skills-based hiring. I cannot tell you how many conversations I've been in with a room full of educators and others in this space saying we have to do skills-based hiring, and the employers are saying we're still trying to figure out what that looks like. The more support we can give, whether it's tools, platforms, information, resources, whatever, to make that easy and accessible, that will help push some of this in the right direction. Wonderful.
But I would add, they need to be both invited and prodded into that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, they need to be an active participant in solving this solution, not just point out the problem and let others try to figure it out. So I appreciate that. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you for listening.